Take one.
That wasn't our real intro?
No,
Okay. Are you introing us?
do that. Yes.
Oh, you just crackled like hardcore.
Welcome to an exciting week on the D3 Datacast. I'm Zach Snyder, joined by the birthday boy, Matt Snyder.
That's
Happy
today.
birthday, brother.
That's today, isn't it? Thank you. Appreciate that sentiment there. That was very, very kind gesture there.
Well, everyone out in listener land is going to give the video a thumbs up, and they're going to click the subscribe button if they haven't subscribed to our YouTube channel yet, Matt. Just in honor of your birthday, a little happy birthday, Matt, thumbs up from
Appreciate
all the great listeners out there. I know that's going to happen.
appreciate those thumbs up. Those are great.
So Matt, I know you're pumped about your birthday, but this week you're even more excited for the release of our first set of regional rankings.
This
Birthdays are fine, but regional rankings are something really worth celebrating.
It feels like we've been talking about this since October before the actual season started about which games have implications for regional rankings and the things. And this is the week. These are the startings of the week. Every week from here on out until selections, we're going to have new regional rankings. So we're going to find out which games were important.
Right. So before we look ahead, Matt, let's look back on the week that was. Is there someone that jumped out at you that you would say won the week?
Yeah, I'm going to go out to Iowa, the American Rivers Conference. I'm going to say Central won the week for me. They had a win over Buena Vista midweek, but then a huge 25-point win over Loris on Saturday. This is coming after the previous weekend's 19-point win over Co. Central's just a half game behind Co for the American Rivers Conference lead. They're looking like a major threat. That's one of the best conferences in the country. They're looking like a big threat there. Central's playing really strong right now, and for me, they won the week. What about you, Zach?
For me, I'm going to go with Randolph-Macon. They got a big win at Hampton-Sydney, and they've been known in that lead pack in the ODAC for a while, but I think this win really stakes their claim as a potential number one when the new poll comes out. For whatever reason, the computers have liked Randolph-Macon all year long, but it seems like the human voters have been a little bit slower to react. Matt, you go back to the episode released around Christmas time, the 10 things we were wrong about coming into the year. We thought maybe this is the year Randolph-Macon takes a step back, but that hasn't been the case. And here we are early February, and we're talking about them as a legitimate choice at the top of a top 25 ballot. And Matt, it's just more than that. It's just so impressive to me how they've turned over the roster. They won a national championship just 2 seasons ago, right? And Daniel Bangay, Will Coble are still here. They were important players, maybe not the first 2 or 3 players you rattle off from that national championship team, but they were played important roles on that team. But the rest of that roster has turned over. Back then we're talking about Buzz Anthony, Miles Mallory, uh, go down the list, but they've turned that roster over. It's Daniel Bangay, Will Coble. Lance Johnson saw some action a couple years ago, but he wasn't getting as many minutes in that tournament run. Like the 3 of them were the most significant contributors. And then it's not even necessarily that this team is those guys plus some guys were like sitting on the bench for that national championship run. They've mixed in some freshmen, sophomores this year. It's just really impressive. We're talking about Randolph-Macon, and I think they were already known as a great program more than just a great team that won that national championship. But this just goes to show when you truly are one of the great programs, not just a great team, but a great program, the kind of thing that's possible when you really have it rolling.
Yeah, I think you're right. Sign of a great program, getting kind of the next generation of talent developed and ready to take over the mantle. I'll admit not being intimately familiar with their roster, but it doesn't strike me as a ton of fifth-year senior grad transfer type players into the program, right? It's players that have kind of come up through the system. And in this day and age where we have like that COVID fifth year available, I don't really think that they're building a team of transfers. So they're just kind of building it up through the 4-year cycle of kind of players that we're seeing. I think you're right. This is one of the top-notch programs in the country right now, and this is one of the years that's kind of proving what we already know to a large degree.
Now, I swear I didn't choose Randolph-Macon just because it provides a really nice segue into our next segment, looking at your top 25 ballot for this week. But I'll take the opportunity to use that as a perfect segue to go into your top 25 ballot for this week if we could.
All right, Zach. So here we are jumping over to my top 25 ballot for the week. And I will maybe just call out right at the top. You mentioned Randolph Macon. They beat Hampton Sydney this week, but I'm sticking right now with Hampton Sydney 1, Randolph Macon 2. This is a very similar top, maybe 5 or so of last week. John Carroll 3, Trine 4, Guilford 5. So that's where I am at the top of my ballot. I looked at that Hampton City Randolph Macon game, a very close game. I think it was a 2 point margin at the end. In my mind, this was maybe two of the best teams, maybe the two best teams in the country going at it, playing a close game, kind of an expected result. This is Randolph Macon's, kind of revenge game because Hampton City got the win on Randolph Macon's home court early in the year. So they've now split the season series. So even with that, even with the close loss, I felt okay keeping Hampton Sydney 1. But I think maybe these are the two best teams in the country right now. Maybe other things in my ballot rounding out the top 10 is Keene State, Trinity, Texas, Trinity, Connecticut, Oswego State, and Platteville. I'm going with our alma mater, Calvin, at number 15. And then I always don't know really what to do from kind of 20 to 25, but this week I settled on Co at 20, then Rowan, who was in my ballot last week, DeSales at 22, Elmhurst 23, and then Central, who won my week at 24, and sticking with Loris, keeping 3 American Rivers teams in there at 25. But there's a lot of big decisions at the end of my ballot there, and that's kind of where I went.
Yeah, I want to go back one more time if we can to the top two there, Hampton
Yeah.
Sydney and Randolph Macon. You mentioned that this was really the revenge game, or this was the game that, brings the two back to even in terms of the season series. So I feel like you're probably looking at it like that perspective where, okay,
Mhm.
Randolph Macon matched what Hampton Sydney had already done, so I'm going to count them kind of even, and then maybe not lean so much on what we just saw in that result, but count that as even from what we saw earlier, and then look at the totality of the picture. And at this point, you feel better a little bit about Hampton Sydney. Of course, then you start thinking about like a blowout win at John Carroll and some other
Yeah.
impressive wins that Hampton Sydney has had. Is that right? Um, in terms of how you're thinking about it?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit difficult because if you take this result and then Randolph Macon's recent results, I think one could reasonably say, like, if I'm voting right now, I think maybe Randolph Macon is playing a little bit better right now, and I think that's totally fair. For me, in this like 1 versus 2 here, I was taking a little bit of a wider approach and still sort of considering some of those earlier season results, November and December, a little bit. That big John Carroll result, I think, still is a significant one. I think we saw Hampton City really, really solidify themselves. I certainly wasn't going to drop them any farther than 2 after this weekend if I wanted to make a change at all. That's still a big one. Randolph Macon, though, their losses were a little bit early on. And since then, they've really, really played very, very well. One of the top teams in the country. So I think anyone could go either way on this one, but I did feel comfortable taking a little bit more of a total resume approach for right now and taking Hampton City one.
Right, and you touched on it. And the other way to think about it then would be to take the recency of this event into account, and I think that's fair too. I just think it's interesting having this being the Randolph Macon win at Hampton City being the more recent result, but then also all it doing really in terms of the season series is evening it up. So I think it's fair to look at it either way. It's just interesting to be able to hear you talk about it, and then maybe as we're seeing other ballots, we'll see other people think about it a little bit differently. And that's why there's 25 voters, because 25 people could think about it 25 different ways.
Um,
Um,
and and just one
Go
more
ahead.
thing, if this was maybe 6, 8, 10 point game, then I probably would have made a switch here. But a 2 point game where Hampton Sydney, was right there at the buzzer as a chance to tie, maybe. It was basically the tight game we expected, and so a possession either way is really not going to sway me too much there.
Right. All right, Matt. The other thing, we've talked about the UAA, the depth, the strength of the UAA all season. If I'm looking correctly here, you're down to just 2 UAAs in this week's top 25. Uh, it starts, I think, early in the season, 3 for sure. There have been times where you figure there's a top 4. So I think being down to just 2 is significant. How are you thinking about the UAAs as you're approaching your top 25?
Yeah, I think I've spent most of the year with 4 UAA teams ranked. So Case and NYU are in my ballot this week, but Emory and Wash U have mostly been in, sometimes out. They both took some losses this weekend. they're good teams. They're definitely in that next mix. We've been talking all year about like 25 to 35 are just as good as basically 15 to 25. They're definitely in that mix. They're still right there with me. Some other teams, like UW Whitewater was highly ranked to start the season. They're probably a team in that mix. A team for me like WPI is in that mix. Tufts, I think, has now just fallen out for me in that mix. I think there's so many teams that are good that could get into the tournament still, that could win a game or two in the tournament. Like it wouldn't shock like if Emory and WashU can get their way into the tournament. I think WashU's probably still looking pretty good. Maybe Emory's going to want to win some games here. Um, it wouldn't surprise me if either of them make a Sweet 16. Right? I still think of the teams as that good, but we just have like a logjam of talent in the top 40 or so that for me now they're just out. They're in that kind of 25 to 35 range, just outside. And that doesn't mean the UAA is any less of a conference. It's still one or two in the country probably, because everyone's good. But I think it's really hard to have multiple teams elite. I think that maybe the ODAC does this year, but I don't know that anyone else does.
I think it's a fair read to say that earlier on, when we were thinking of it maybe like a top four, bottom four, there's two of that top four have seem more
Yeah.
like there's like less of a gap, right? There's not like this clear cut kind of middle ground. Emory and Wash U, the results have been a little bit more mixed, and Brandeis and Chicago have won some games. And it's just there's like a 6 team pack that really has to get figured out, as opposed to being a more clear top four, bottom four.
And I know that conference is so difficult, and the travel schedule can be difficult. When you're on a road weekend, it can be really tough to win games. But when you get into the conference tournament, if you don't have the luxury of playing at home, you're going to have to be on the road, and you're going to have to win some of those tough games. So, like a Wash U, if they were to play at Trine or versus Calvin, or flying out to play Cal Lu, they're going to have to play those types of games. They're going to have to win those. And I think teams like Emory, like Wash U, in my mind, have had some trouble winning some of those road games as well in the UAA play. And it's tough, and I get it. But for me, just this week, just outside.
Now, Matt, another team I wanted to talk about a little bit here that they've come up a couple of times on this here D3 Hoops YouTube show in a couple different ways, just mentioning them being a team that's been off the radar to some in some respects, and that's St. John's. I know they've been in your poll. This is not a debut for them in here, but St. John's is a team. Looking back at last week's full poll, they only totaled 13 poll points, and in their position here where you have them, this will be nine points from you alone. So already on some ballots I've seen come out, St. John's is in there, so maybe they're gaining a little bit of momentum, but it's just not a team we've talked a whole lot about. It seems like every time we talk about them, it's in the context of trying to like bring them on the radar a little bit more than they have been. So I just thought it'd be a good team to give you an opportunity to talk a little bit about St. John's, because you've been on them a little bit more consistently and earlier than a lot of other people have.
Yeah, I think it's a little bit tough for St. John's. They're still playing that deep MIAC schedule, so they only had a few opportunities earlier in the season to go outside of conference and get some of those cross-regional games. And once I think that conference can be a little bit insular once they get into conference play. So I think they've been mostly taking care of business. They've been playing pretty well in MIAC play, and they look very strong. Haven't piled up too many losses, and now we're getting at the point where I think they're definitely in that mix of teams. Like I don't know for sure that St. John's is a ton better than Emory or Wash U, even though they're in my poll at 17, which is fairly high, and those other teams are out. But they're in that big mix of teams that I think are relatively even. And since they're taking care of business, they're beating other, fairly strong, that's a fairly strong league there in Minnesota, and they're winning a bunch of games. So I think that gives me some interest, some confidence in St. John's. The computers like them as well, and I definitely look at the computers and that they inform my decision. But I think maybe nationally it's a little bit harder to get a read on a team like St. John's, just because it's been so long and so few opportunities for them to play other conferences and cross-regional games.
And then one more conference, it feels like week to week we just have to talk about in terms of how it's shaping up or shaking out. And that's the American Rivers this week. On your poll, you have Co, Central, and Loras in. Which of the contenders leaves Nebraska, Wesleyan, and Dubuque out? Um, I feel like this is a situation where all 5 of those are good. You can't probably rank all 5. It's almost like,
Yeah.
spin a wheel each week and see which ones you're going to take.
Yeah, so this week I ranked all the way out to 40, who I thought were my top 40 teams. And all 5 of those American Rivers teams are definitely in the top 40. It's just sort of like, again, that rotation of teams in and out, who I think is playing pretty well right now. Central for me, I mentioned Hampton Sydney. I took a little bit more of a season long approach on them to keep them number 1. Central for me, it's more about how they've been playing these last handful of weeks in the American Rivers Conference. They're like only a half game behind Co for that conference lead right now. They're playing great. I feel like Central's really dangerous right now, and part of me pushing them up to 24 is I think how they're playing right now. I think Co to me Co is still the class of that league, but it's so even. Like it could go any different direction. I really debated about Loris, like are they in versus out? If I'm even getting this straight off the top of my head, I know I was looking at this when I was doing my ballot, but Loris has beaten Nebraska Wesleyan twice, or did I have that one backwards? It's so hard in the American Rivers because it feels like everyone has beaten someone who's beaten someone else. Maybe Dubuque's the only one that has the short end of that stick, kind of among the other top 4 contenders. I feel like maybe they've lost a little bit more than the others have, but it's just so difficult. All these teams are so even. So whoever's just in my poll, then the others are just outside the poll. I feel like I want everyone, like those whole top 5 between 20 and like 30 or 35 or something like that.
All right, Matt, we got to reorient our brain from top 25 ranking discussion to regional ranking discussion, right? I think it's always important what we talked about here with the top 25, what we're going to get into here with regional rankings. The two have nothing to do with each other.
Yeah.
Top 25 is fun. Regional ranking, serves its own purpose, has its own set of criteria. So just got to switch our brain here, Matt, as we move on, because we do get our first set of regional rankings this week. They will be not a ranked list, but an alphabetical list. So for each of the regions, 7 teams will be ranked, except for in Region 2, where 6 teams get ranked. So there will be, the number of ranked teams. They just won't be presented in any sort of order. So this week we're going to go through, give you a little preview of what to expect. And Matt, we're going to do something extra special. We're going to start with Region 10 and work backwards instead of starting with Region 1 and working towards 10.
Yeah, Region 10 so often gets the short end of the stick. We wanted to feature them here first, go 10 down to 1, and feature Region 10 first. Yes, as you said, we'll get alphabetical rankings this week. The way I will show them is a fairly loose order, especially toward the top, where I did not spend nearly any time at all trying to suss out the order of the top teams. I was really worried or really focusing on, what are my last kind of 2 teams in and who are the kind of 2 teams out, and trying to make those conversations correct. If anyone watched the QCast this past week, they had a great episode of In the Room with 3 former committee members. And they went through the mock ranking of Region 7, and they did a similar thing where there was like 4 or 5 teams in Region 7 they kind of knew were going to be ranked, so they kind of put them in and then spent more of their time at the end. That's kind of what I did too. I'm not showing them alphabetically. I'm kind of showing them in order just because that's going to be how you have to do the process anyway. But if you're looking at the screen and you really want to say like, oh, that team's second and they should be third and the third should be up, like, okay, fine. Like I didn't care about that right now. So anyway, let's go through. We're going to start at Region 10. I think here from Trinity down through Hardin-Simmons, who's about 5th in this region, I think those are all very solid resumes, and they will fairly easily make this week's alphabetical ranking. Just kind of looking at winning percentage and strength of schedule. We don't need to dive any further to, I don't think, figure anything out, right? Head-to-head and common opponents. Of course, this week we don't have results versus regionally ranked opponents because we don't have any previous regional rankings, so that won't come into play. So there's really 4 primary criteria. So I just kind of considered through Hardin-Simmons to be safe for this week. So then kind of taking a look at Claremont Mud Scripts, and you can see that their strength of schedule dips a little bit. 509 in certain regions can get a little bit low. So maybe that's like maybe where your first discussion point is. But then kind of for me, looking at the next list of viable candidates, I was comfortable kind of taking Claremont Mud Scripts with the 750 winning percentage because we weren't getting a whole ton of other high strength of schedules with very high winning percentages as well. So very comfortable with the Stags there. So really for me, it came down to kind of Whitworth, Whitman, and Texas Dallas. I think I eliminated George Fox, who I thought was maybe the 10th team in this region from the discussion, based on basically a lower winning percentage number and a strength of schedule. Like if you look at Whitworth versus George Fox, you're just kind of taking Whitworth, I think, based on those numbers. So this is where I kind of was looking at maybe some more head-to-heads and some common opponent type results. Whitworth, of course, has beaten Whitman twice. So even though there's a winning percentage advantage for Whitman here, 7-14, I think Whitworth is going to stack up above Whitman just based on those two those two head-to-head games that Whitworth won both of them. So now I'm looking at Whitworth versus Texas Dallas, and to me this is actually very close. A 650 for Whitworth winning percentage, 667 for Texas Dallas. And then that advantage is flipped when it comes to strength of schedule, 530 for Whitworth and 513 for Texas Dallas. So I really don't know which direction that the committee is going to take this. To me, I would favor the higher strength of schedule just a little bit in this case because they're very similar margins. So I think Whitworth gets a narrow edge. But what we don't always know is if they would look at something like non-conference strength of schedule, which is a secondary criterion, and Texas Dallas might have a little advantage there. These two teams really don't have head-to-head and common opponents. So really comparing Whitworth versus Texas Dallas, I think there's not a whole lot to choose there. So for me, I went with Whitworth just in, and then then Whitman and Texas Dallas just out. So I think that those top 7 are the ones we will see ranked in Region 10 come Tuesday.
Yeah, I think that's well said. With when you get down to the Claremont Mud Scripts line, you look at their resume, it doesn't stack up in terms of winning percentage and strength of schedule with the 5 teams ahead. But then you look at that next group of teams, and I feel like it does stand out enough to make them an easy number 6. And then agree. I mean, when you go to the Whitworth Texas Dallas, you're talking about a 17-point difference on the winning percentage and strength of schedule. So I think that difference is more meaningful in strength of schedule, and that being where Whitworth has the advantage. I definitely agree with Whitworth slotting in there, and obviously the sweep of Whitman is huge.
Yeah, that'll be massive. Yep. So I think we'll move on to Region 9 now, unless there's anything else for Region 10 for you, Zachary.
No.
Okay.
I think that's good. That's a fairly straightforward region, just
Yeah.
with some interesting decisions. But I feel like they're decisions we can be comfortable making, as opposed to saying I don't know. Which I think we'll get to a couple of those situations later on.
Right. We will. And then as we move into Region 9, I will also say that the way that the actual national or the NCAA does these regional rankings is with regional advisory committees and then a national committee. And so they all spend a long time on each region. I was trying to work through these on Sunday afternoon myself. So like one person for 2 hours is not going to do as good of a job as all of the regional committees. So I'll probably miss some. And then you can all hit me in the comments and tell me how dumb I was. But just letting you know, I'm one person and their whole committees. So they'll probably make better decisions than me. So looking at Region 9, I always find Region 9 very interesting right now because I feel like the resumes are all, like at first glance, just all the same. You get kind of a bunch of winning percentages in like the 850s range or so, and then a bunch of strength of schedules that are kind of all fairly comfortably in the 500s. So we don't have a lot of crazy high winning percentage or crazy low winning percentages with mixed strength of schedule. So kind of very, very interesting here how even it is. Obviously, I think we're seeing the American Rivers dominate the middle section of these regional rankings, and we just had a big conversation about the American Rivers Conference, how good it is, and that's kind of why. Maybe following a similar pattern as Region 10, I kind of looked down through Dubuque and just looked at winning percentages and strength of schedules and said, okay, these teams are all fairly comfortable. And then looking at some of the head-to-heads that might be in play between teams kind of in this top 7 range. And I felt pretty comfortable with those teams being in. Like maybe Loris of those groups has a little bit of the weaker strength of schedule at only 515, but then you go kind of toward the bottom of the region and compare them to St. John's, and it's very in line strength of schedule, but a winning percentage that's higher. So I don't think that Loris is really in contention for falling out of the region. So I think that that's all safe. So then I really wanted to have the conversation of, Central versus St. John's versus Bethany Lutheran versus Illinois College, maybe. I think I kind of just eliminated UW-Whitewater because if you look at their winning percentage and their strength of schedule, like they're just not competitive with the rest of the region, those kind of top eight or nine teams. So I think like UW Whitewater might just be out. And so we're talking about those middle four teams, Central, St. John's, Bethany Lutheran, and Illinois College for the final two spots. And then for me, I just kind of try to look at maybe more comparable resumes. So if I'm looking at Bethany Lutheran and Illinois College, and you look at the strength of schedule differences and the winning percentage differences, like for me, I'm just going to prefer Bethany Lutheran of those two. So I think Illinois College is just going to have a difficult time getting above Bethany Lutheran, and that's even like if we consider looking at the secondary criteria, non-conference strength of schedule at all. So for that maybe like eliminates Illinois College to some degree because I don't think they're going to be able to get above Bethany Lutheran. So it's kind of interesting discussion here because now we do get in maybe some disparate resumes. Like Central's is the most different from everyone else. They have a lower winning percentage, but definitely the highest strength of schedule. Kind of still among these teams in consideration, a 714 winning percentage and a 557 strength of schedule. So you have to kind of compare that to St. John's, which it's almost 100 points of winning percentage. That's different, but like basically 40 points of strength of schedule. So these are the discussions that are always difficult for us to do, not knowing exactly how the committees are going to weigh these types of things. Just maybe looking at Central over like against Bethany Lutheran. Central has one common opponent, maybe advantage. Central has beaten Simpson, and Bethany Lutheran has lost to Simpson. That's like maybe one common opponent out of the whole thing. That's not a whole lot. But when we're talking about like, I don't know how to compare all of these different resumes, maybe that ends up being a big deal. I'm not exactly sure. So you could use that to maybe put Central above Bethany Lutheran, and then the final conversation becomes St. John's versus Bethany Lutheran. This one was very difficult for me. I ended up saying, like, perhaps the committee looks at the non-conference strength of schedule and then sees that St. John's had like a massive, like they took every opportunity in the non-conference to build their resume, 654 non-conference strength of schedule. And maybe that ends up being some sort of a tiebreaker between these two teams. So I ended up taking Central and St. John's. I was not super confident at the end of this region. I wouldn't be super shocked to see Bethany Lutheran in there somewhere, and that could come at the expense of either of those others. It could come at the expense of Central, or it could come at the expense of St. John's. I think these are very challenging when we have, I think, three fairly different resumes, and we don't have things like results versus regionally ranked opponents yet. So you're going to have to kind of maybe break ties in whatever way possible.
Well, and Bethany Lutheran having a head-to-head win over Central makes things even more interesting.
Oh, yeah. I maybe didn't even consider that properly when I was doing this.
Yeah, so this is a region I think there is a decision to make kind of just above and below that cut line. But really, Matt, the thing that jumps out to me is I'm glad that they don't have to actually put out or we don't have to worry about a ranked list for these ARC teams because, as you said, they have so similar of resumes. There's just a bunch of wins kind of all between them, and they sometimes contradict each other in terms of who swept who, and I don't know how at this point you would even try to parse out the five different teams and try to rank them. So I'm glad we get another week of information before we have to actually worry about where they would be ranked.
Yeah, and with 4 weeks overall of regional rankings, we're going to have a lot of time or some time to maybe mix these up a little bit. I'm just going to look through again because I think you're right. I put down that win for Bethany Lutheran over Central, and then I was diving into further criteria. So I think I probably would put Bethany Lutheran back up there.
January 2nd.
I would probably put Bethany Lutheran back up there. Now the conversation is Central versus St. John's, and then that's a close one. And who knows? So maybe Central's the one. Maybe Central's the one that's out. So yeah, I probably got myself too tangled up in that conversation and forgot the obvious one there. So that's Region 9. Region 9 is going to be difficult. But yeah, I think I'm wrong. I think I'd put Bethany Lutheran above the line. Okay, looking ahead to Region 8. Region 8 is a very different kind of resumes. These strength of schedules are not what we're used to seeing from this region. I think this region is very weak overall this year. So it'll be super interesting. Chance this region doesn't. I mean, maybe some chance they don't get any pool Cs. I think they probably do get one. But yeah, just not a good region overall. right now. I don't think there are very many teams that would be safe in other regions ranked right here, but just considering what we're looking at on the screen, probably Wash U, Elmhurst, and Illinois Wesleyan are indeed safe in this region. Interesting that I say that about Elmhurst with just a 492 strength of schedule, but that's going to be a very competitive number based on what we're seeing elsewhere in the region. I'm going to consider also Anderson and St. Norbert fairly safe, and also Wisconsin Lutheran maybe. St. Norbert has beaten Wisconsin Lutheran head to head, so I think that keeps St. Norbert above them. And then if you compare teams like Anderson to St. Norbert, very similar winning percentages. Anderson with a little bit of a bigger strength of schedule there, so maybe Anderson is the mix. I think more interesting is at the bottom, maybe the last team in this region. I was kind of looking at Chicago, Transylvania, and Carthage. I think I just ruled out Hanover. I don't think Hanover's numbers are very competitive here. This is maybe an interesting conversation at the end. Chicago's SOS is still not super great, 536, but it does stand out as the most positive out of the whole rest of the group. 650 winning percentage is also not great. That's kind of below where you'd like to see for any sort of Pool C consideration, especially with only maybe a middling strength of schedule. But Transylvania, for instance, their strength of schedule is quite poor. Their non-conference strength of schedule doesn't help them out at all if we're looking at that kind of conversation. So for me, I kind of just went with, I think the committee is not going to like to look at a 461 strength of schedule if they can help it. And Transylvania didn't really have any head-to-heads that would help them. So absent, with a really weak schedule, I think we've seen committees, at least the past couple of years, maybe opt toward more of a Chicago resume, even though that winning percentage is lower than maybe we would want to see it nationally. But the 530 strength of schedule is more in line, I think, with what the committee likes to see as far as who you're playing against. And Chicago's maybe won enough of those games right now to be in the rankings.
Yeah, you go down the list, the winning percentages get worse, but the strength of schedules don't get any better. And then that's where Chicago jumps out because of the one that does have like you said, even a 536, which is not like super great, stands out in this list where you're seeing a lot of just 400 winning or strength of schedule numbers that are just not even close to being at 500.
Yeah, and it's odd to look at maybe like the St. Norbert resume, 818 winning percentage, 462 strength of schedule. I think that's going to be safely ranked in this region this week, and that we're not going to see that in very many regions. I think where that resume gets safely ranked. It's just kind of the nature of this region right now. And yeah, I don't think we're going to get a lot of Pool C consideration here.
Well, and you look at, okay, so what are the other options besides Chicago, right? You look at the 800 winning percentage for Transylvania. It's only a 461 strength of schedule.
So that's the St. Norbert resume, but worse.
Right. And then you get into like the Carthage Hanovers, and they're basically the Chicago resume, but with worse strength of schedules.
Yeah.
So it's almost like you have to arrive at Chicago by default.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, there's maybe a Chicago versus Transylvania discussion. There's a 150-point winning percentage gap there that Transylvania has in their favor. But it's like 75-point strength of schedule gap. So
yeah, that's a gulf.
We see that this strength of schedule gap kind of overcome that type of winning percentage gap. But I think that's a conversation. And if Chicago was out and Transylvania was in, like, it wouldn't completely floor me. Although I think we've seen the last couple committees maybe opt for this Chicago type resume.
Yeah, I agree.
All right, rolling on up to Region 7. This is the one we saw In the Room folks do. And I think we have an interesting comparison, Zach, that you were pointing out to me earlier today that I'll let you make in just a moment here. But I think I'm going to do what the In the Room folks did and say John Carroll through Mount Union. These resumes, given what we see kind of a little bit further on, are just going to be completely safe. Probably the order is correct, even though we won't see the order this year. But John Carroll, Trine, Case Western Reserve, Calvin, Mount Union, all going to be very safe to be ranked in Region 7 this week. The next one up is Hope. I think that they will be safely ranked this week. They have a very good strength of schedule, very competitive strength of schedule, and their winning percentage is high enough. That's kind of an even across the board resume that the committees tend to like to see. So then the discussion was St. Vincent versus Geneva versus Marietta. Maybe important to note that St. Vincent and Geneva split their season series, so there's no head-to-head advantage there. Maybe a slight Geneva common opponent edge. I think there was like 2 games that they had won that maybe St. Vincent had lost. But then St. Vincent also has a non-conference strength of schedule advantage if they look at the secondary criteria. And then also I think just maybe the fact that 515 just ends up looking a lot better than 479 when it comes to kind of a little bit of a margin over 500 versus a bit of a margin under 500. I think that makes a big difference there. So for me, even though Marietta has the best strength of schedule there and 667 is pretty okay, for me, I took the 833, 515. I think that looks reasonable across the board. I took St. Vincent over Marietta at the end of the day, and that's what I went with.
Which brings up the interesting note here, Matt. As you mentioned before, this was the region we saw work through in the QCast episode in the room with our former national committee members. And at that time, as they were going through Region 7, now we should note, so this is with updated through games played on Sunday, February 4th. In the room was done a couple days ago, so we didn't have the weekend play.
Through Thursday, yep.
Right? So that was just through games of Thursday, right? So this is not an apples to apples comparison about what we think versus what happened then,
Right.
because it's a new data set. But what was interesting to note here is that during that QCast episode, as they were getting down to these final spots, and St. Vincent came up, St. Vincent's strength of schedule was much lower through Thursday's games, and so they were immediately thrown out because they had that outlier low strength of schedule. And I would add, I completely agree correctly that that was the decision at that time. But after the play this weekend, suddenly St. Vincent's strength of schedule jumps up to 515, which looks much more competitive than I don't remember exactly what the number was.
492 or something like that.
Yeah, 492, 495, whatever it was. It was definitely in the fours. But Matt, so we talk a lot about this process and how it plays out, and we try to explain it, and that's not always the same as agreeing with it or advocating for it, right?
Yeah.
You can go back, everyone can go back to episode 42 we did. We called it Fixing the Primary Criteria. We set out some suggestions for how we would fix the process, right? Now, I think that in general, the process overall leads to a reasonable result, overall. But sometimes you get these little snippets that show you on a really micro level some of the weird things that can happen, right? So and this St. Vincent case is one of them. So take that QCast episode. St. Vincent was thrown out because they had a low strength of schedule. Now we're looking at games played through the weekend, and all that has changed with St. Vincent in terms of games played is they lost at Geneva, right? So their resume gets a big strength of schedule boost because, as we see, Geneva's won a lot of games, but their winning percentage takes a little bit of a hit because they lost the game, right? So in losing the game because it was against a really good opponent, they get the strength of schedule boost. Suddenly, as we're going through this, they look viable, whereas previous to that game being played, their resume didn't look viable. So you see these little idiosyncrasies, which sometimes you can win a game that somehow makes your resume look worse, and you can lose a game that somehow makes your resume look better. Now, I don't think this is going to be a big problem. This just happens to be that St. Vincent played a really high winning percentage team at the right time, and we're seeing the boost in SOS come through right now. But over the course of the next few weeks, it's expected that their strength of schedule will go back down. But this is a case where we could see very much how losing the right game or winning a game that's against a really low opponent can hurt you. And I don't know, it's just kind of wild to think that all St. Vincent did between then when they got thrown out because of the low strength of schedule is lose a game at Geneva, and now suddenly they look more viable than they did a couple days ago.
Yeah, just the across the board resume looks like, oh, it's not really an outlier anymore too much. Now,
Right.
also in fairness, right, Marietta also lost a game, so their resume looks different. If Marietta had won their overtime game this weekend, maybe we still find a way to take Marietta over St. Vincent. But I don't think it's as much of a slam dunk as it seemed. Well, I mean, there was a conversation. It was never a slam dunk. But you're right. That outlier SOS being below 500, I think, does make a big difference rather than 515. And even though the winning percentage took a hit, I think overall St. Vincent does look like they have a more positive resume after the Geneva loss than it did before, which is, kind of a weird portion of the way that things work out.
But I think looking forward, Matt, if St. Vincent was going to get ranked, it needed to be in this set
Yeah.
because I think they have some more problematic
Yeah.
things coming down the line, just in terms of that strength of schedule with they're not playing Geneva every weekend, right? So that's going to tick back down as we start to add in results versus regionally ranked opponents. Neither they nor Geneva have anything that's going to add to their resume there. So this is sort of like the ceiling for their regional ranking ability. So we'll see what happens from here. But it looks like they're viable for getting into this first alphabetical set.
Yeah, at least now, and I don't think it's a given that they'll fall out. Like a team like Marietta's got to win some more games to try to fight for that seventh spot. They have the
Well, and
opportunity to beat a John Carroll or a Mount Union coming ahead. St. Vincent doesn't really have those types of games remaining on their schedule. They also have like a win versus Illinois Wesleyan that's going to show up as a ranked win, kind of in their back pocket already. Games like that will maybe favor Marietta a little bit more than St. Vincent has the opportunity.
correct. And Christopher Newport as it pertains
Yeah,
to
right.
Marietta. And then this is also the time we need to mention Carnegie Mellon is looming out there as another one of those UAA
Hmm.
potential, if they can win enough games, high SOS teams. They've got some wins that will be regionally ranked opponents to their credit coming on board. So there's definitely some changes to the picture here coming in the bottom, probably spot or two here in Region 7. I think we've got a pretty set top five, and I think
Yeah.
at least for the time being they slot in pretty nicely and pretty without much discussion. But yeah, this is another one that's really gonna be interesting to watch as we head into week 2 and we start to get that regionally ranked opponent information in, because that alone could have a significant impact on the bottom of this the ranking in week 2.
All right, moving ahead to Region 6. For me, this was the most difficult region once we got toward the bottom. So I did this. You see the head to head, you've been seeing the head to head results all along. That's kind of what teams have done versus what I kind of ended up thinking were the top 7 teams or teams kind of right in the neighborhood. I handled this region a little bit differently. I just took Hampton Sydney, Randolph Macon, Guilford, Virginia Wesleyan, and Christopher Newport. I think by their winning percentage and strength of schedules, those teams are all going to be fairly safe. And I just kind of compared them against each other just for kind of fun to show what they've done head to head up there. And then I kind of re-looked at everything from like Mary Washington on down and kind of looked at head to head. So Mary Washington, Maryville, Tennessee, Roanoke, Bridgewater, Washington and Lee, Emory, and Shenandoah. I went 12 deep in this region just because I think that there's maybe 12 teams you need to look at in this region. Um, I think what we're kind of left with after I called those top teams, everyone down to Christopher Newport safe, is we're kind of left with more or less two different trios. I kind of figured. You have one trio of Emory, who has beaten Mary Washington, who has beaten Maryville. So kind of those teams interact on a head-to-head nature. And then you have Roanoke, who has beaten Washington and Lee and Bridgewater. And then Bridgewater, who has beaten Washington and Lee as well. And these two trios don't really interact with each other much in terms of those head-to-head or common opponents. So it's really hard to compare. Like, what do you do with Emory's 600 winning percentage but 595 strength of schedule compared to Maryville's 773 winning percentage and 509 strength of schedule? Especially when they haven't really played if they haven't really directly played too many similar teams. Well, I guess those have. Emory beat Mary Wash and Maryville lost to Mary Wash, so maybe those do. But then you throw Roanoke in the mix, who's maybe the Emory resume but better. Roanoke has a 619 winning percentage and a 609 strength of schedule, but they haven't really played anyone with different results than like Mary Washington has. Like, okay, they both beat Bridgewater, but like that doesn't really tell us much. So for me, it was very difficult, and I don't think I ended up really drawing the line exactly where I thought it would be. It was just going to be more of a discussion. I think if let's just take a step back for a second and look at kind of some of these teams, winning percentages and strength of schedules. I called Mary Washington good because I think the 590 strength of schedule is about as good as we see out there. And then when you pair that with the 650 winning percentage, which is also, about as good as we see kind of teams below the line, then I said, okay, maybe Mary Washington ends up getting there. Then after that, for me, do you take Maryville, who has a more moderate resume, like the highest winning percentage, the only one like in the mid to upper 700s, and then like an okay but not great, kind of lowish strength of schedule 509? Do you take that moderate resume, or do you take the Roanoke resume, which is the astronomical 609 SOS, and a 619 winning percentage, which is kind of on the lower end? Right. I think both of those numbers keep Roanoke above Emory, but like it's not super great resumes. I really don't know what the committee is going to do here. I think you could go in a bunch of different directions. Then you also consider, right, like we said, the head-to-heads. Roanoke has beat Washington, Lee, and Bridgewater. Bridgewater beat Washington and Lee. So then, like, Washington and Lee's 667 winning percentage maybe doesn't play up above Roanoke at all. Very complicated region. I don't think there's an easy answer. I just kind of ended up throwing up my hands and saying I'm not quite sure. There's a lot of different directions I could see. I could even see, with the head-to-head win over Mary Washington, I could see maybe Emory getting into the rankings, even though I kind of think that they'll be out. So I don't exactly know what to make of Region 6 right now.
Yeah, you hit on a lot of points there. I mean, you say you can see Emory going in, but you just look at the winning percentage and the strength of schedule, and Emory just looks like a worse Roanoke in that
Yeah.
regard. So it's how do they get above Roanoke? The other thing that jumps out to me is you just look over at that right column in terms of some of the season head to head. Like Washington and Lee and Bridgewater show up an awful lot, so that makes me ding the chances that Washington and Lee or Bridgewater would
Yeah.
be able to get into that mix just by how often they're showing up as having head to head losses of all, in the mix of this group of teams. But you're right, you kind of work yourself around in a circle. It's like, what do you want to take? And if you're showing preference for the strength of schedule with Mary Washington, then if you it kind of feels like you need to discount Maryville because the strength
Yeah.
of schedule is their problem. But yeah, so maybe it could be Roanoke, but Roanoke's got an even lower winning percentage than Mary Washington. So maybe there's a little bit of a threading of a needle where Maryville just kind of is just right, and
Yeah.
they can slot right between Mary Washington and Roanoke because they've won enough games where they maybe couldn't make up the strength of schedule difference with their winning percentage over Mary Washington, but maybe you say that they can with Roanoke.
Yeah, and that's where I end up. I think it's going to be between Maryville and Roanoke. I think it's one of those two teams, for a lot of those reasons you just said. You know, to some degree, I think the committees have liked the strength of schedule that Roanoke would put out there. 609. That's a really good strength of schedule. That's one of the best numbers that you'll see for teams that are kind of in that below the line type of a range. But then again, a winning percentage is like 620. That's not very good. And you'd get a lot of coaches that would complain about, like, at what point do you need to actually win some of these games, Roanoke? And yeah, they've won some games, but only 62%. You have a team like Maryville that their strength of schedule is above 500, and they've won 77% of their games. So that's the interesting conversation. I think this, like, I'll be just very fascinated, and we'll only see alphabetical, but we'll know, like, is Maryville in or is Roanoke in? And I think it's probably not both, right? Because I think Mary Washington, especially with the head-to-head, is above Maryville. So
Right.
I think it's probably not both. I think it's one or the other. There's probably scenarios in which it's neither. It'll just be fascinating to see how exactly it ends up. And I'm certain that this is a region where I at least got something wrong.
Well, we talk a lot about at the back of this region here for good reason because it's such a cloudy picture as to who gets in and who gets left out. But Matt, I want to go back to the top there with Hampton, Sydney, and Randolph Macon. We've talked about them a few different times already on this episode, but you look at those winning percentage and those strength of schedules, and those are like slam dunk host second weekend type
Yeah.
resumes that both of them are putting up.
Yeah, my kind of fake formula puts them as the top two seeds. Like, I put them at top of my ballot. They're the top two seeds overall in the tournament, and we know that those two things are not always necessarily the same. So They have solid, rock solid NCAA resumes, and I think they have rock solid performances so far. Yeah.
All right, let's get on to Region 5.
Okay, Region 5. Hopefully, Region 5 is a little bit more straightforward. So, for me, I thought that my top six were just going to be definitely in. Um, that's Widener, that's Catholic, that's Hood, kind of up at the top. Then Johns Hopkins and Gettysburg, I feel very good about. And then just kind of looking at the rest of the resumes, Franklin and Marshall, I felt fairly good about. I think that they're going to be pretty safe in there with an 810 winning percentage and a 500 strength of schedule. So then for me, my conversation came down to one spot, and I was looking at particularly Eastern and Wilkes. I think Alvernia was in the mix as well, but they've lost both to Eastern and Wilkes. And I think that kind of knocks Alvernia out if they've beaten neither of those teams, and both those teams have wins over them. So I said, Alvernia, you're out. It's Eastern and Wilkes. There's no head-to-head there, and both of them, their only common game was that 1-0 versus Alvernia. So that's difficult too. In this case, I took the 592, which is a very strong strength of schedule. I took that advantage for Eastern, with this, even with the 650 winning percentage, over the 762 winning percentage of Wilkes and the 511 strength of schedule. I also took a peek over at that non-conference strength of schedule and saw that there was a pretty big advantage for Eastern there if they do decide to go to the second page, the secondary criteria, which I know they don't like to do a lot, but that is also sitting out there for Eastern. I don't feel 100% about this, but that's kind of where I ended up where I was with Eastern ranked and Wilkes maybe not ranked right now.
Yeah, definitely a little bit more straightforward than what we saw in Region 6. That is probably going to be the murkiest picture we take a look at. But um, yeah, I don't know if there's really a lot to talk about here, Matt. I think it kind of works itself out and makes sense the way you have it here.
Yeah, and I'm just kind of glad I wasn't focused on the ordering at all to figure out the
Right.
um, Johns Hopkins has lost to Gettysburg, who's lost to Franklin and Marshall, who's beaten Johns Hopkins type of a thing. I just let that all
Mhm.
be and said I'm not worrying about the order there and just
It's
kind of
like a
moved on.
mini ARC situation
Yeah.
in the Centennial
Yeah,
area. Yep.
and maybe when everyone's beating everyone, it makes it easier because you just say like we're not worrying about the head to head anymore. We're just going to look at the other numbers. So I don't know how that is, but to me, Region 5 was a little more straightforward. So I was thankful for that after Region 6. Okay, we are looking at Region 4 now. I think for Region 4, I was very comfortable with NYU, with Rowan, with DeSales, with Stevens, and then I was a little bit questionable at Penn State Harrisburg's 490 strength of schedule. I think maybe we need to look at that a little bit more, but I ended up taking them with the 864 winning percentage. Just comparing them to maybe some teams lower on that are just below my cut line, like Stockton, a 636 strength of schedule. That's over 200 points of winning percentage. I think that there's going to be maybe some way to find out that Penn State Harrisburg is ranked here. Not 1,000% confident about that, but let's call it for now that they're safe. Although I do recognize that they're the SOS outlier, so maybe they do find their way out. So my internal conversations on this one kind of focused around maybe the bottom three: Stockton, Ramapo, TCNJ. I think I kind of ended up ruling out Montclair State as kind of more of a worse version of Ramapo and TCNJ. So I don't think Montclair State ended up being super competitive there. So kind of what I looked at, common opponents between these teams are all even. They're all NJAC teams. And TCNJ, Ramapo, and Stockton are all fairly close-ish in the NJAC standings, so you can kind of see that their common opponents don't tell us too much there. Everyone's beaten Rowan once, for example. I think I ended up going with TCNJ. I think that the 727 winning percentage I think puts them just above that. That's a kind of a quote unquote good number, whereas Ramapo and Stockton have maybe quote unquote questionable winning percentages. And I think Ramapo and Stockton split their series, so it gets a little bit complicated. Maybe I ended up going with maybe the more even resume of Ramapo than maybe the more outliery resume of Stockton, just because I think when there's questions, maybe the committees like to take something that's a little bit more even like this. So that's what I did. I wouldn't be completely shocked to see Stockton ranked, but I think Ramapo is maybe in at the end of the day.
Well, let me say this: if Stockton's ranked, maybe it's at the expense of Harrisburg,
Yeah,
right?
possible.
I think TCNJ and Ramapo make a lot of sense, but and if I'm looking for something weird to happen, I would say it would be Penn State Harrisburg not getting in. Um, Although you talk about the winning percentage and for Stockton to get in, like that's an even bigger a bigger difference than if we're looking at just TCNJ or Ramapo. Um, and I agree, Montclair just looks like the worst version of Ramapo, so I think that they're probably out, and Stockton has a bigger SOS advantage over Montclair that I think that the you can explain away the winning percentage difference there. So really, I what it comes down to me, I think that the wild card is Stockton versus Penn State
Yep.
Harrisburg more than even comparing Stockton to the other NJAC teams there.
Yeah, I think that's very possible. Again, it's just hard to tell. Like, is a 200 and whatever it is, 30-point winning percentage gap, can that be overcome by 85 points of strength of schedule or thereabouts? Those are tough conversations, especially without a direct formula that compares the two. The committees kind of have to feel it out and say, does this overcome? Um, Stockton's resume is still outliery enough. It's not like there's a safer option on the board. Um, so we'll have to see. That's going to be a very interesting one. And I think you
And
might
this
be
is a
right.
and this is another one where the outlook could change drastically for week two because Stockton has wins over Keene State, two over Rowan,
Yeah.
and you start giving them credit for that. Penn State, Harrisburg, they have a win over Alvernia, who we talked about earlier, but that's going to be another area where Stockton has an advantage over Penn State, Harrisburg. So it'll be just interesting to see um, what happens, and just because we see one thing in week one doesn't mean we will see the same thing in week two, because once we add those regional ranked opponents in there,
Yeah.
that's an area that Stockton could vault ahead of some others.
Right. It'll give a team like Stockton then extra criteria to maybe be above Penn State Harrisburg rather than just doing
Correct.
the winning percentage versus strength of schedule
Right, and it would
comparison.
be a clear advantage for them.
Yeah. But also recognizing that we're double counting the strength of schedule to a large degree, because the reason your strength of schedule is so high is because you played those regionally ranked opponents, but also credit for winning them. So I do get that to some degree. So that is region 4. Region 3 is next. 3 is after 4, before 4. Um, so for me, Oswego State at the top, Hobart next. I think those two teams are very safe. Then I list third Farmingdale State, who has a very disparate resume, a 652 winning percentage and only a 459 strength of schedule. That's a type of a resume that maybe gets left out a lot, but then maybe compare that to Utica down below, who I still have above the line as well. Like, that's just obviously maybe a better Utica is Farmingdale, I think. So I think Farmingdale does get ranked. Again, I didn't worry about the order here too much, so maybe Farmingdale is not really that high, but again, we won't find out this week. I think St. Lawrence is in with the 700 and the 555. That's a strong strength of schedule. SUNY New Paltz is probably in 762 winning percentage and a 501 strength of schedule. It's not super high, but it's probably definitely playable with all those other strength of schedules that are below the cut line here. So then for me, starting to look at Utica versus RPI versus Brockport versus Nazareth, I think we can maybe more or less eliminate St. John Fisher, who's the 10th team listed here. I think Utica is probably preferred to Brockport, giving the SOS difference there. Utica and Brockport don't have any really meaningful common opponents to draw on, so I think we're just kind of comparing raw numbers here. I think the question for me was, does RPI get in above Brockport? Brockport is kind of a better version of Nazareth, so I think they stay ahead of Nazareth for sure. But there's no, like I said, head-to-head or meaningful common opponent differences there. Both Brockport and RPI lost to Oswego State, so that doesn't mean anything. Brockport is 0-1 versus Hobart, and RPI is 1-1 versus Hobart. Not a big difference there. So I think we're left playing that winning percentage versus strength of schedule game, maybe looking at the non-conference strength of schedule. So I opted in this case to go with the strength of schedule, but I'm not very comfortable with that or very confident with that. I think Brockport's 714 winning percentage maybe gives them the more even resume, but again, I think if we can not choose winning or strength of schedules in the 400s, they can sometimes tend not to do that. So it's a similar question we had on the last page with Penn State Harrisburg, right? What are the committees going to go with, and then like are they going to do this? They want to do this the same between regions, so is that how it's going to end up, right?
Well, you talk about Utica, the 463 is really low, but then you look at what we've got off the board here, and those all start with 4 as well. Now, maybe you start looking at 497 being a lot more playable than 463, but you talk about wanting to see 500s there. Well, there's just no options there. This region, Matt, a lot of these resumes give me the vibe of a less severe region 8 maybe,
Yeah,
but some of the resumes are a little bit more jumbled and being less severe, like there's not the clarity. Like in region 8 you could say no, these resumes are very weird for what we usually see in region 8, and the strength of schedules are by and
very
large really
low.
bad,
Mhm.
but you can kind of work through how they would be slotted. Here it's not quite like that. You have a few that are, strength of schedules that'll play, and you're left to kind of figure it out. Yeah, I'd like to see another option besides Utica with a 463 SOS, but I don't know what it is. I mean, at some point you have to look at that 850 winning percentage, and you start comparing it
Yeah.
to low 700s, and maybe that's what they go with.
Right. You compare Utica to Brockport. There's like what a 34 point SOS gap. That's significant, but 135 or so points of winning percentage. And I think that winning percentage gap does or should maybe bridge that SOS divide there. So especially when we're talking about an SOS that's still below 400. Those will be the interesting questions. See exactly how they'll fall out. But yeah, for me, I think Utica is kind of above Brockport, but hard to tell for sure.
And even though we don't get an ordered ranking, we will get answers to these because we'll see who's in and who's
Yeah.
not out, and that will be very instructive as we go forward for what we can expect down the line.
Yeah, and they're going to spend most of their call time on kind of the last two in and first two out kind of discussions because that's usually you can tell, okay, the top six are kind of in and we know let's move on.
All right, Region 2 is our smallest region. That's why we only have 6 ranked teams in Region 2.
Yeah, to me, Keene State obviously very good nationally. They're very competitive. I think Nichols is looking strong as well. They are in. WPI is going to be safely ranked this week. Western New England, again, inoffensive resume, very good, strong across the board. They are in. Same with Clark, 727, 546. I think is comfortably ranked. So for me, the question this week in Region 2, really the only question, the only decision is do we take Brandeis or do we take Western Connecticut? Brandeis has the 650 winning percentage and a 567 strength of schedule. Western Connecticut has an 818 winning percentage, but only a 426 strength of schedule. That's a very low strength of schedule. That's lower than we really considered in any other region. I think below. Brandeis and Western Connecticut did not play head to head. Both beat Plymouth State. Both beat Rhode Island College. Brandeis beat Mass Dartmouth, and Western Connecticut lost to Mass Dartmouth. So there's maybe a very slight common opponent difference there that would favor Brandeis. Also, if we're going to look at non-conference strength of schedule, Western Connecticut's non-conference strength of schedule is only 364. Very, very low. I think these strength of schedules are not going to get the benefit of the doubt. So in this region, I would rank Brandeis and not rank Western Connecticut.
Yeah, it's just wild to think about a 140-point difference in strength of schedule.
Yeah, that's massive. And even though it's 170 points of winning percentage, I think Brandeis has done fairly comparable work against a lot better competition, and Western Connecticut hasn't really played very much.
Yeah, it's a big difference in winning percentage, but really, I don't think there's all that much discussion here. I think this is what comes out. And then you look below that with Endicott, Coast Guard, Mass Dartmouth. There's nothing there that really presents any other discussion
Yeah.
points. So I think you're right. It's between Brandeis and Western Connecticut, but I would be very surprised if that doesn't come out Brandeis.
Yeah, and then again, future weeks, once we get regionally ranked opponents in the mix, a team like Brandeis playing in the UAA usually
Yep.
gets further advantage by being able to compile some of those games. And if Western Connecticut's not able to beat Keene State, then they're not really getting those opportunities in conference elsewise. So I think we'll maybe see Brandeis solidify their spot in the rankings going down the road. So I think in the end, Region 2 for me ended up being pretty straightforward. And then that will transition us to our final region, Region 1, which was, for me, I think one of the most straightforward regions in the entire country. I think fairly clear. Trinity, Connecticut ended up taking their first loss of the season kind of this last weekend, but they're looking still very, very strong. Tufts is definitely safe. Winning percentage and strength of schedule are strong for them. St. Joseph, Connecticut, very safe to be ranked. Connecticut College, very safe to be ranked. Albertus Magnus Williams, I called very good. And then we take a little bit of a dip and a dive in the strength of schedule column. And I was looking at Morrisville State and Westfield State just to kind of look. But then you look at the big winning percentage gap between the two. And I think it's very clear Morrisville State is just in. Westfield State is out. And then you just take another peek. Like, do we want to even look at Amherst? And like 591 winning percentage, I think the answer for me is no, at least not above Morrisville State. So I kind of just ended everything there and said that those top 7, that was the top 7 that my fake formula gave. I didn't have to make any flips in this region at all. And I just called it good. I think that's our 7 in Region 1.
Yeah, you get to Morrisville State, and it's the first resume in the list. You really want to see like, okay, well, what are my other options? Then you take a look at the other options, and you're like, okay,
Yeah.
yeah, that makes sense. It's Morrisville State.
Yeah, and if you did want to take a peek at that non-conference strength of schedule, Morrisville State did a lot of work in not in their schedule there, 635 NCSOS. So if we do go to the secondary criteria, I think I've probably mentioned it more times on this episode than they'll actually use it, but that would be in Morrisville State's favor as well.
There you go. That's what to expect. The only difference is we'll see them in alphabetical order.
Yes, we won't know the order at all, but we'll be able to kind of loosely say what order they were probably in, unless the NCAA has done something weird like change the way we're calculating strength of schedule. Then I think our numbers are pretty accurate here. So we'll have to see if anything crazy happened, but likely not to be the case. And this will be the same way we've been calculating these numbers, which have matched for years and years and years now. So I'm fairly confident in the numbers that we have versus what the committee members will be seeing.
Speaking of that calculation, another opportunity to plug episode 42, Fixing the Primary Criteria.
Yeah.
All right, Matt, those are the regional ranking predictions. Let's go on to our weekly game slate predictions, see how we did last week. It started off with Johns Hopkins Gettysburg. Johns Hopkins was 2-point favorites at Gettysburg, but Gettysburg defends home court there with a 68-60 win. We both dropped that one. A game we've talked about already here, Matt. St. Vincent was getting 7.5 at Geneva. Geneva did get the win, but it was a closer game than 7.5. We were on the point side there with St. Vincent, so we get that despite it being a 73-69 loss for St. Vincent. Game on Saturday night at Yeshiva. Farmingdale State was a 76-57 winner at Yeshiva. The computer liked them by 8 points. Matt, you had Farmingdale State. You pick up the win there. I was on the Yeshiva side. And a wild late game situation again involving NYU and Emory. NYU was getting 3.5 points from the computer at Emory, and they get a 3-point win, 81-78. Matt, we both pick up a point there. And then in the game of the week, we've talked about that one already. Randolph-Macon and Hampton-Sydney was a straight-up pick'em game. Randolph-Macon gets the 48-46 win. We both liked Hampton-Sydney in that one, so that goes as a loss for us. Kind of a middling week for both of us, Matt. I was 2-3 to go 39-25-1 overall on the year. You pick up a game on me going 3-2. You are now just one game back of me, 38-26-1. You've been on a bit of a roll here. You've been picking up some games, picking up some.
I've got the hot hand.
You do.
All right. This week's slate. Here it is, week 13. We have DeSales, 1.5-point favorites on the road at Stevens. We have John Carroll, 4-point favorites on the road at Mount Union. Big game in the CCIW next. Elmhurst, 1.5-point underdogs at Illinois Wesleyan. And then Wash U, 6.5-point underdogs at Emory. And then our D3 Datacast game of the week, Trinity, Connecticut, the Bantams. The computer likes them by 5.5 points on the road at Tufts. Tons of road underdogs this week. Zach, let's go up to the top. DeSales and Stevens. Computer likes 1.5 points as the spread. What do you think?
I think I like home dogs, Matt. Jack Spellman is one of the best bigs in Division 3 basketball. More people should know his name. Give me Stevens.
I'm going to go the same direction as you, Zach. Stevens, the underdog at home. I like them to maybe win this game straight up. So give me a point and a half, and I'll take it. The next game, John Carroll and Mount Union. What's your pick?
Well, John Carroll absolutely destroyed Mount Union in their first meeting. So you could say that this is a revenge motivation game for Mount Union, but man, I think that John Carroll's really separated themselves at the top of the OAC. I'm gonna lay the 4 on the road and go with the Blue Streaks.
Yeah, for me, these are two top 25 teams. You think two top 25 teams, maybe the home team should not be 4 point underdogs, but I'm not only going to say that that's fine, I'm going to also take John Carroll here. I think 4 points is not enough. Blue Streaks are going to win by more. I'm really, really high on what John Carroll is doing right now. Going out to the CCIW, Zachary, your pick.
Yeah, this is a huge one for the CCIW race. Illinois Wesleyan opened the door for Elmhurst with a loss at Milliken. I think they defend home court. Give me the Titans.
I think Elmhurst has a chance. They're going to seize their opportunity on the road. I think they're going to have a chance to win this game. I know the 1.5 points is a tight spread, but I'm going to take Elmhurst to cover that one. Next, we're going down to Atlanta in the UAA. Your pick.
I'm gonna go wash you on this, Matt. This feels like the 6.5 is too big. I mean, I don't know that what you can trust out of Emory right now, except for I feel like one way or the other, it's gonna be a tight game. I think it'll be inside 6 points. Give me wash you.
I would almost take every UAA game to be inside of 6.5 points. Almost for that reason alone, I will take Wash U as well and think that this is going to be a close one. And then game of the week, your pick.
I will once again go with the home dog here, Matt. 5.5, maybe is not too big of a number, but my expectation is this is going to be a lower scoring game, which makes a 5.5 point spread maybe feel bigger than it would if it was a higher scoring game. So give me the Jumbos.
I think this is a game that Tufts could win straight up. I don't know that they necessarily will, but I think they could. So 5.5, I think is too big at this point. So I will take the Jumbos as well. I'll take Tufts to cover that spread. So we only have one game different this week, Zach, with the big Elmhurst at Illinois Wesleyan game. That's going to be a biggie for our standings. See if I can draw even with you.
Have roles reversed? Are you the one who's trying to make enemies in your picks now, or what?
I'm not trying to make any enemies. Why? Who's enemy? Who's an enemy?
I don't know. It sounds like Bob Quillman has a Matt Snyder problem.
Oh.
All right, mailbag. All right, Matt. First mailbag here comes from national champion John Gleich. Which teams that aren't projected in the field are the most dangerous? And I think John recommends a few here. UW Whitewater, Final Four last year, preseason hype, underachieved, new coach, and his beloved Pointers beat Platteville and River Falls last week. Lost at Trine by 1. New coach, young team. Any initial reactions, Matt? I did go through and I have a list of some teams that I think maybe fit the criteria. Now, first, let's also point out we had an entire episode talking about potential dark horses. Although we were framed it in terms of not being in the top 25 at all this season, so we were working under that framework. This is a little bit of a different framework here. Any initial reactions, Matt, before I go through a couple teams a few teams that I picked out?
Yeah, I didn't do a deep dive, but teams that are not in my projected field right now, like Elmhurst, I think is just out, but we've seen them be good. I think they could win. They're not in my field, not because they're not a good team, but because their metrics don't quite stack up right now. But I think Elmhurst is good. They could be a second weekend team. Another team maybe in a similar boat would be someone like Claremont Mudd Scripps. If they can find their way into the tournament by winning the SCIAC, I think they could be a very dangerous team, be a second weekend team or beyond. So those two definitely stick out for me, but I'd be interested in hearing your list as well.
I did have both Elmhurst and Claremont Mudd Scripps picked out. Interesting to note, Matt, CMS hasn't lost in 2 months.
Yeah, they've been playing well.
So a couple more just to add to the list. I would go with a non-Rowan NJAC, right? I think we went through it. I think in terms of the NCAA criteria, Rowan is the team that looks safest right now. So if Rowan doesn't win the NJAC automatic bid. Whoever gets in there probably could be dangerous. And then maybe like a little bit of a deeper dark horse, Matt. I'm gonna go with SUNY New Paltz. They
Okay.
just recently took Oswego to overtime. They seem like a team that's maybe putting it together a little bit. I will admit, not a team that's really hugely been on my radar during this season, but I feel like they're just starting to pop up a little bit more, maybe playing their best ball, and certainly taking Oswego to overtime stands out. So let's say they make a run in the SUNYAC conference tournament, find their way into the tournament. Hey, you never know.
Yeah, for sure. Good picks. Good question too. Thanks, John.
All right, one more in the mailbag here, Matt, from Max Fan. I noticed that for your prediction tool, which we'll give a plug, daily predictions available at d3datacast.com, you automatically give 3 points to the home team. Massey has a home field advantage score per each team, although it's all within a very small range, 2.62 to 3.06. Have you considered including specific home field advantages in your predictions, or is it not worth it since the range is so small?
I think for right now, I'm not really considering it. It's a little bit hard to calculate it per team and then to see how predictive that is and maybe how persistent that might be across seasons. So I have not done that. I've been just more of the constant 3 points. I actually brought that down to three. I think I was too high previous seasons. I might actually even bring that down again into next season, maybe more in like the 2.5 range. I did kind of build myself a little tool, and I think earlier on I checked kind of maybe what the difference between teams that had played on the like at home than on the road or vice versa in one season, and what the scoring differential would be between those two in those situations. I think it's been a little bit closer to 2.5 points this year. I have to rerun some of those numbers, but I might be changing it even down a little bit. But I'll probably just keep it flat across the board just for simplicity's sake. I don't know, necessarily how predictive that might be on any individual season. And it would be just a lot of work to do it individually. So I probably won't.
So the answer is it sounds like a lot of work, so you're not going to do it. Got it.
Yeah.
But Matt, it would be interesting. I know another plug for a QCast episode. Bob talked to Jacob Schauer, who's recently come out with some rankings, and his specifically are meant to be predictive, right?
Yeah.
And Jacob had a good discussion and description of there about the different types of rankings, and that some are predictive, some are not necessarily predictive, but even if it's not meant to be predictive, my understanding is that if it's really good, it has a certain amount of predictive value, which I think probably, the stuff that we have on d3datacast.com fits more that description versus what Jacob's trying to do, which is specifically predictive. So it'd be interesting, him being someone who's looking at the predictive side of things, if he would have more of a customized home field advantage versus just like a straight three.
Yeah, you'd have to develop that and then, spend time figuring out uh, what are the reasons why it would be. Just because it shows up as a home court advantage for a team doesn't mean that necessarily is what the home court advantage is. It's just what it's been observed to be. And that like true performance is like your observed performance plus random variation. So a thing like home court advantage in any given season probably has a lot of random variation. So you have to figure out what is like the true value of that by the arena or the atmosphere or whatever, the travel conditions that road teams face, et cetera, et cetera. So that would be a project for someone, and that would be maybe not me right now.
Fair enough. All right, that concludes the mailbag, Matt. For our listeners, if they have anything they'd like for us to address in a future mailbag, they can send it to us. Leave it as a comment on the YouTube episode. Find us on social media. Lots of ways to get a hold of us, and we would love to address your concern in a future episode. Which leaves one thing to do, Matt, and that is to thank our dear Patreon supporters. You can go to patreon.com/D3Datacast for more information, how you can connect with us at a deeper level, support the show, support everything that we've got on the site, help keep it available for everyone. No paywalls, no ads. We're so grateful for these people who've taken on what I like to call like a voluntary subscription, so that can all be available for everyone. And Matt, we have a new Great Job Team tier supporter. That's Bill Leahy. So thanks to Bill and the continued support of everyone else listed here.
Yeah, shouts to Bill. Thank you so much. Thanks to everyone else on this list. We appreciate you participating with us. Hope everyone enjoys the data on d3datacast.com, the episode this week as we predict the regional rankings. Those should be out Tuesday, and hopefully maybe we'll be out with a little bit of a reaction maybe later Tuesday night to see what we got right, what we got wrong, and what it might mean going forward. So maybe look out for some bonus content this time of year on our YouTube page. Things that we don't normally do, but with exciting regional rankings, we'll maybe post an extra episode throughout the week. So be on the lookout for that. I hope I'm not promising things without talking to you about that first, Zachary. But I'm looking forward to doing some of that. But yeah, that's
clearing my schedule as we speak.
Yeah, get it moved out. We got important D3 stuff to do this week. But it was a fun one. It was a long one. Sorry about the extra length, everyone, this week. But had a lot to talk about, 10 regions to get through. And after that, this is a good job, team.